Matthew chapter 13, once again, is where we're going to be. Let's go ahead and bow our heads for a little bit of word of prayer. Lord, this day, God, we finish up this series, and we listen to your words. God, we listen to your Son who shared the things that are important within this life that we have. So God, help us to mark this time. Help us to know that over the last 4 weeks together, God, that we've not only listened to the parables, not only listened to the words of your Son, but God, that we can take those with us wherever we go. We can share those with others. We can show those before others. And God, we can literally take those within ourselves, internalize them, and then live in such a way that we can be different, God, because we have eternity. So God, as a believer, Lord, I pray that we can hold on to that. I pray that we can see others through your eyes. I pray that we can live from the inside out. But God, if there's anyone here, Lord, that doesn't know you, help them to know today just how important they are to you. Help them to know today that for as much as we love them, it pales in comparison to the love that you have for each one of them. And God, for each of us, Lord, help us to be that light once again before others, that light that you shine on us. It's in your name we pray. Amen. This is obviously a very, very difficult week. No one expected to hear about a mass shooting one day at school. And when the news first came out, it was 2 students and 15 that were injured. And later on, it was found out that there was 17 that were killed. The numbers just kept growing and growing and growing. And then you start to look into it, and you find out afterward all of the different things that had taken place. And all of these are a reflection of our society. The young man that chose to do this, the FBI had received a tip about him and was told that this guy has guns and he wants to use these guns and he's planning on using these guns, and they get a lot of tips, so they chose not to follow up on this. And this young man had planned this obviously for a while, because even in his plan, he had already had book bags and different things planned on campus, even to his own escape route. And his escape route was becoming part of the student population. And so after he had done everything he had done, he literally walked out of the school like any other student. And once he got in with all these other students, there was no way to know him from any of the other kids that were there. So as he walks out, they literally have it on his footage where he literally walked through and he left. And for an hour, they couldn't find him, partly because they didn't know exactly who it was they were looking for, and because they were trying to lock down the campus and everything to try and control it as much as possible. And so this guy, for an hour, he literally took an Uber driver. An Uber driver dropped him off at school. It was a school that he was expelled from, 19 years of age. And then afterward, he just went out and went to a Subway at a Walmart, hung out for an hour and just chilled out. And then when they caught him, he was like, yep, I did it. I did it. And we hear this news and we think there's no possible way that something like that could happen in our community. That's in Florida, and that's, it's a bigger place, and it's a bigger school, and none of us can be marked for that. And yet, this same week, a young man from Manchester was taken into custody because of, on social networking, putting a video out talking about administrators eating 8 rounds. And he posted it. And the threat was out there, and he was arrested. And you think, oh my goodness, how could that possibly happen? Well, that young man, I once coached basketball in middle school, and he was one of the kids that tried out for that team. He was a super kid. He was a nice kid. In 7th or 8th grade, whichever year it was that he tried out, you would have thought he was just like any other teenage kid, smiling, laughing, trying to make a basketball team, trying to just go out and play and just be a kid. What happens in between them? What happens from middle school to high school? Or what happens from middle school to senior high or even to college? What takes place that someone would get to that point? Because we would like to think that would never happen. We would like to think that we would never know someone that would do such a thing. And we'd like to think that's something that just would not take place within our community. And yet, we all know that's not true. The reason we know it's not true is because many years ago, God was asked to leave the schools. And God said, you go ahead and head on out. And we all know as a believer that God is a gentleman. He's not going to force himself upon He's not going to force himself upon me. Even when he sent his son Jesus, he didn't say, hey, listen, you have to do this, and this is the command that you've got to follow. He allowed them to walk just as we walk, and he allowed them to be a part of the everyday society, community, schools, workplaces, whatever it might be. But God didn't force him on us. He brought that gift in love. And so, things like this happen, and then we sit back and we start to look at, okay, well, what about gun control? And what about pulling guns back? What's going on with our society? What do the numbers say? And what do the statistics say? And we look into all these things, but we don't ever really dive in to what God teaches through this. We never dive into the words of what Jesus says. We don't find the emotions within the Psalms and the wisdom within his Proverbs and then within those words of Jesus so that we can rest in those words. And sometimes we hear them and we find that peace in it, but we don't really do anything with it. Today, you saw all the teenagers that got up and walked to the front, and they've been doing a teaching over the last couple months which talks about their faith, and it talks about from an apologetic standpoint and why their faith is so important, because it is difficult to live it in schools. It's tough when you're the only one that chooses to want to live the right way, or maybe it's just you and a couple friends and everyone else is against it. And it's almost like you're in this own little world. But here's the thing. That shooter was in his own little world. The people that are on the basketball team, they're in their own little world. The people that are in the play or the musical, they become in their own little world. And whether or not they choose to allow God into that world is their choice. And whether or not we choose to share about how important it is to have God in that world for them is our choice. But if we don't have God in our world and we are not sharing it from our standpoint and we are not living it before them, why in the world would they choose to live that way? And that's what this comes down to. I have to fit in somewhere. And when I can't find the place to fit in, then I'm going to take matters into my own hands. I haven't grown up in church. I haven't heard about God. I don't see anybody living that way in front of me. So why in the world would I ever choose something that I've never even been introduced to? The choice isn't there. The opportunity isn't even on the table. So I'm going to choose based on what I see in society. I'm going to choose based on the latest video game, the latest set of movies, the coolest thing on YouTube, whatever it might be, because those are the things that we are constantly in front of, and these are the things that our kids have that are thrown at us left and right. So are there warning signs? Yeah, there are warning signs. Are there sad moments that happen? Absolutely. This is one of the most tragic. But what does everyone want to do to fix it? Gun control. Let's pull the guns back. Let's have these laws on guns and guns and guns. I have news for you. If somebody wants to get a gun, they're going to get a gun. That's the bottom line. They only have to rob somebody's house that they know that has a gun. It's that easy. Well, that person had a concealed permit, and that person had the right to have it, and that person, that person, that person. Yeah, but that person broke into that house and they used that very gun to use it on people that are innocent. Is that really a solution? It's not. It's a Band-Aid for a little bit, but it's just that long until it happens again. And so we have to make the decision within our society. We have to make the decision within our communities. We have to make the decision that we want to pass this on to our schools, but it's not the schools and it's not the communities and it's not our society. It's the people in it. It's our hearts that we carry. And hopefully as a believer, God has changed us from the inside out so that as a mom and as a dad, we don't just sit back and hope, man, I hope that my kid's going to be different. But we're talking to them about these things, even if it scares them. You'll know how far to take it, how far not to take it. And then when their friends are over, then you have these discussions. And it might not necessarily be about a school shooting or something along those lines, but it could be about, hey, what's going on in your school? Hey, what are the teachers saying? Hey, what are your friends talking about? Hey, what is it that's important to you? And we can see those things when we are a part of their everyday life. Because if we choose to to just turn away. And if we choose not to dive into those areas, they're going to turn somewhere. And if we haven't opened ourselves to them, why in the world would they ever turn back to us? They won't. And if our message isn't God's message, why would they ever choose that message? They can't. And so the science class, or the school cafeteria, or the hallways, or the library, or the closet that 19 kids were shoved into by a teacher, or the kids that had an athletic director dive on top of them. Their lives obviously were changed forever, but it just wasn't that day. It was overtime to an area that we thought we would never ever get to. This was unheard of 30, 40, 50 years ago. And yet, there were times that it took place. But it's gotten worse and worse and worse. So at what point, at what time do our kids and our children, are they going to matter enough that we are educating them and caring for them and loving them, not according to what we feel or what we see the world is doing, but according to what God's Word teaches us? See, when Jesus shared these parables that we talked about over the last 3 weeks, he shared the things that mattered in that culture because he wanted them to be able to relate to it in their everyday life. Did it mean these people were perfect? No. They struggled with relationships at times. They had husbands and wives that left one another. They had divorces. They had death in their family. They had sickness. They had struggles financially. They were subservient to someone. Someone was always telling them what to do. It's all the same things that we deal with today. And what Jesus shared at the time, these are the things in their culture. Were school shootings in here? No. People using guns in here? No. But do the things take place that had the absence of God in them? Absolutely. And so what we need to remember as we dive in today into these parables is that Jesus wants you to know what is important. But he doesn't want you to keep it to yourself. It was never intended that way. When you walk out these doors, you're going to head out today, and there's a sign above the door, and it's going to say, "You are now entering your mission field." And every mission field is different. We all work someplace differently. We all live in a different community. We all live on a different road. Our kids may go to a different school. Some of them may go to the same school. What example are we setting before them so that when they see us, they can see God? Because right now, they're not seeing God, and they don't even realize it. They're seeing the absence of God, but they don't know it's the absence of God because no one is showing them that God is everywhere. And God can be in all things. Now, some of us are sitting here right now and go, "Man, that's a lot of pressure. You know, you're throwing this stuff on me. It's just kind of deep and stuff." I get it. I totally get it. It's tough to do all the time. Are we going to be perfect at it? Nope. We're not. But in seeking Him and in seeking God, part of our calling, our everyday walk, is to be that for our kids and our grandkids and their friends and people that we've never even met. And it's a choice that you and I make. And here's the thing, you have to remember something, and you'll learn this through today's message. If you're not searching for God, you're serving yourself. If you are not seeking God, you're serving yourself. And so in every moment, what is it that matters to us? I believe we all matter. Blue, black, white, yellow, green, plaid. Everybody matters. The Bible teaches the human race, male, female, they all matter. Because that's what God teaches us. But I want to start with a warning. Tomorrow is Monday for everyone. We're promised today. I want you to challenge yourself today to take the message that Jesus shares with us and to make the decision that we're not going to wait until tomorrow to live it. Because we are promised today. And this time that we have is so important. And those kids that are in there right now are so important. And those kids that are back there right now are so important. And for some of you that don't have children yet, they're going to be important. And when you talk to someone who's older, who their kids are grown, and their grandkids are grown, and their great-grandkids are here, they will tell you just how much every one of them matters. Regardless of race, regardless of gender, regardless of if they're their kids or someone else's kids. We have to start living that way. I shared this statistic with some of you before. 70% of 70-year-olds have grown up in the church. 50% of 50-year-olds have grown up in the church. 30% of 30-year-olds have grown up in the church. Do the math. If your kid's 17 or 7, 5, 3. The church is getting to be a very lonely place. The church isn't helping itself by saying rule, 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 regulation, 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 dress this way, act this way. It's not helping anything. We've gotten so far from the teachings of Jesus and the words of Jesus and the wisdom that God's love letter shares with us, we're actually pushing people away. Every statistic supports it. People are running away from churches because the music isn't loud enough, the lights aren't good enough, the smoke machine was too smoky or not smoky enough. They're finding every reason in the world. But at the end of the day, what matters the most in this love letter is, are we loving others as Jesus loved others, and are we making disciples in His name? And once again, we are not seeking, we are not searching for God, and we're serving ourselves. Jesus dives in chapter 13 of Matthew, which is where we've been over the last few weeks. This is the final week as we dive into the parables. We chose chapter 13 of Matthew because it is about all the different parables. And some of these parables are in Matthew, and some of them are in different Gospels, some of them are not. Does that mean that they weren't shared? No, it's because of the audience that Matthew is writing to. Matthew is a Jew, and he is writing to the Jews. And these words that Matthew shares are very, very important, not only to him, but to his entire audience. And remember that when he is writing this, he doesn't know that he is writing this just before the Jews. He doesn't know that this is going to be reaching people all over the world for generation after generation to come. A timeless message, an eternal one. And so each week we've had a chance to jump in, and we've talked about the weeds, and we've talked about how the weeds grow with the wheat. And the wheat is what God is looking for, but at the end, they separate the two. We've talked about the different soils and how it can be scattered about. We've talked about we just had a little bit of faith, that faith of a mustard seed. And then we talk about the yeast, that many times in the Bible, yeast refers to evil, but it also can refer to something that's growing. It's what we put into our lives, even that small stuff that becomes every part of who we are. Matthew also shared it earlier in his gospel, and shared the words of Jesus, that we're striving to be perfect. And yet we know that we can't be, but it doesn't mean that we should ever quit. And Jesus shared with us. So as we dive in today, this is the most important part, and it's the final part of this chapter, as Jesus shares with us starting in verse 44. He says this. It says, "The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy went and sold all he had and bought that field." Now, some of us sit and wonder and go, okay, well, how is it that a treasure could be in a field and nobody knew about it? At this time, in the Palestine area, at this time, it was very easy for sandstorms to hit, and they could hit with such ferocity that literally they could bury a city. In fact, if you were to go to what is the city of Jericho today from the Old Testament, the city of Jericho that you see today is not the city of Jericho. The city of Jericho today is the city of Jericho, but the Old Testament city of Jericho is actually up the road from it. Because there was such a huge sandstorm at one time that literally the sand had covered everything over, and it was literally the city was gone. And so people could start to dig down, or they could just build on the next plot, and that's what they chose to do when the sand stopped. They were able to literally go down to what the city is now, and they found something very interesting. They found the walls that surrounded the city of Jericho. And they found that when the walls fell, the walls had fallen in. Just like the Bible shared with us. They walked around the city however many times, they blew the trumpets, and the walls fell inward, which is impossible. But see, with God, all things are possible. And so the city of Jericho sits next to it because it was covered by the sandstorm. So if people had something of value, they were always worried about being invaded. They were always worried about being taken over. There was always this anxiety. There was always this, what is coming next and what does tomorrow hold? So I'm going to take the things that matter the most to me, and I'm going to go out and bury them in a field. I'm going to bury them in my field. So that way when I need to go and get them later, I have them. Many people did this with their clothes. If they had fine linen, if they had different things they wore, it could be purple, whatever the richest color was at the time, they would go and bury these clothes underground. Then it was time to use them. They would bury them or unbury them, and then they would bury them back again. So many people who would buy land after the place was taken over or to purchase this land would go out and look for this treasure. It was part of what was done in the society. So when he is sharing this makes sense to people. Oh yeah, man, I remember this one time, this lot was over there, and they made it for sale, and I did it, and I found this on it. I found clothes on it. I found gems on it. I found coins on it. There was a couple here recently that was in California. They were taking their dog for a walk on their own land. This is their own land. And as they were going, the husband had a metal detector. He's going out with a metal detector, and the wife's walking the dog, and they're just checking out their land. And next to a tree, the metal detector went crazy. So they did what one of us would do. They started digging down, and what are we going to find? Are we going to find a quarter? Are we going to find an old retainer? Are we going to find, what is it we're going to find here? They found a coffee can, and inside that coffee can, it was filled with gold. And it was worth literally millions of dollars. Well, here's the thing. They used their entire life savings to purchase this land. And they have this gold now that's a fortune. But once the government found out about it, they said, we're going to tax you on it. And so you have to pay taxes on this gold that you just found. And here's the amazing thing. To buy gold, everyone's like, oh, put your investment in the gold. The percentage that you get on selling the gold ended up being less than what it would cost to have the taxes to actually keep the gold. So the people that found this treasure actually lost money in finding the treasure if they were going to pay the government. Now let me ask you a question. How many of you, if you would have found that gold, knowing what you just heard, would even tell anybody about it? We would keep it to ourselves, wouldn't we? Knowing that the government might step in. But then how would you ever be able to get rid of the gold? So you would have this treasure that you would have, and you would keep it to yourself. Because you'd walk around in fear every day that someone may find out and rob you, or the government may find out and tax you. And these are real life things, aren't they? These are things that we would all deal with. Because now I have this wonderful treasure, and I have nothing, and I have no way, I don't even know what to do with it. Well, what's the best treasure that you've ever had? What's the most valuable asset that you've ever had? What is that one thing that you have found that you can't help but share with others, and yet you're worried that you might get attacked over it? Or you're worried that someone might attach something to it? And so when Jesus shares these words, he starts off with the very thing before the treasure. Too many times we hear the story, we went right to the treasure, didn't we? The treasure, the treasure, the treasure. Jesus shared the treasure at the beginning. He says the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy went and sold all he had and bought that field. We all went to the fact that, oh my goodness, he found this can full of gold. He dug it up. He went and hid the gold back again. Then he went out and he sold everything he had, and then he went back and bought this just so he could get the treasure. What a great story. I'd do the same thing. I'm walking on a piece of land, it's $10,000. I find $10 million worth of gold. I'm going to go sell my car. I'm going to go sell whatever it is I have to get the $10,000 to go buy the land. And look, I got all the gold, and now I can't tell anybody about it. And yet it's the most valuable thing that I have found. Someone might attack me for it, or someone might attach rules to it. Jesus uses the term, the kingdom of heaven. It's said 31 times in the New Testament by Jesus. All 31 times are in the book of Matthew. 8 of them are in this parable. And so in our lives, do we treat the kingdom of heaven as a treasure? Or, when we hear the words, do we too often go past that treasure to what the world has to offer. Man, that guy found some gold, and then he sold his land, and then he gave everything he could for it. And we miss the importance, through the words of Jesus, of what has the eternal value in that kingdom of heaven. Jesus continues and he says this, again, he wants to remind you, again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant looking for fine pearls. When he found one of great value, he went away and sold everything he had, and he bought it. See, he is using the treasures of the time. He is using what relates to each one of us. And so your pearls or your gold may be something completely different. But there are things of value that you have that you would sell everything you have just to buy that. Especially if you were an astute businessman, especially if you knew on the backside that you could make even more from it. Because now, if I could find a treasure and it might be worth $1 million and I only have to pay $100,000 for it, well then I'm set. Because now I can retire. Or now I can just go buy a beach house. Or now I can just run away. Now I can go and hide. And when we say those things, we're like, that's not actually a bad idea. But is that what God wants from us? Too often we find those treasures and we do the same thing that these people did that time. We hide it. Too often we find these things that matter, and we want to share them, and we want to talk to our kids about them, and we want to talk to our kids' friends about them, and we want to have these conversations, and we don't because everyone else in society, everyone else in the schools, and everyone else in our workplaces, they are doing their thing, and my treasure isn't going to matter to them. When Jesus was sharing these words, no one had ever talked about the kingdom of heaven. No one. Here was this guy that sat down, and he was a rabbi like the other rabbis, and yet he didn't share the rules. He was a teacher like the other teachers, and yet he didn't shove the law down their face. He shared with them stories that related to them as a mom, or as a dad, or as a husband, or as a wife, as a child, as a worker, as a teammate, as an everyday person. And they mattered not because of what was at the end, but because of what was at the beginning with the kingdom of heaven, which was then promised at the end. See, a merchant that looks for pearls, there's certain ways that you can tell fake pearls from real pearls. How many women here feel like they know the difference between fake and regular pearls? Okay, listen, I'm going to share this with you, and you're going to love me for it. If you're ever going like on an antique, like looking at places, and you want to know like how to find this other kind of stuff, there's this wonderful thing out there. It's called YouTube. And you can find the answer just about anything. So I went out and I found this jeweler that did a whole thing on it, and there's like 10 different ways to look at pearls and to be able to test both. Okay, so like the weight of them. So if they're heavy, then they're real pearls. If they're very light, they're not. If you look at the pearls and they're all the same size, they're fake. If they're slightly different size, oh, then they're real. If you look at them and they're very shiny, you can almost see your face in them, they're fake. But if you look at this kind of a dull thing, then they're real. Who wants to go buy pearls now? Are you excited? Guess what? They didn't have YouTube at this time. But this merchant knew the difference with them. And this was an age-old thing that was used. And it's the thing that everyone goes back to. That when you take those pearls, you rub them on your teeth. And if they feel gritty, one of two things. Either they're real or you haven't brushed your teeth. Okay? But if they're smooth to your teeth, then you know that they are fake. At this time, they could picture that merchant taking these pearls to their teeth. And that merchant, because they had been around, understood the value to it. But he also was a merchant that knew that he had to seek it. And in his life, there was a want to find that treasure. In his life, there was a will to go and seek that. And in his life, at the end of the day, he knew what was the real deal and what had value and what didn't. But he chose to seek it for its value. And he chose to find that treasure because the treasure was out there. When's the last time that we went looking for a treasure? When's the last time we had a little map and maybe had an X on it we can go to see? When's the last time we did a scavenger hunt? When's the last time we went to seek for things? At Easter time, we're going to have all these kids run around looking for all the Easter eggs. And we watch them and they run and they love it, right? They go and they open up an egg. What's inside of it? Something's going to tear their teeth apart. But they want to be able to check pearls when they get older. Right? But we're going to watch them. We're going to see how excited they are. We're going to be excited for them. And for those who don't have kids, oh my goodness, one day that's going to be my son or my daughter. How great this is going to be. When's the last time we did that? See, Jesus says that we should be doing that every single day. We should have that desire within us. Because if He has given you the keys to the kingdom of heaven, and that is your treasure, why in the world are you keeping it to yourself? Because you and I are the merchants. And you and I as believers know the difference between someone who doesn't believe and someone who does. You know why? Because we have been on both sides. And for someone that's not a believer, they can't understand it. They can't believe sometimes that they are worthy of being loved. They can't believe that God would look at them and say, you are worth it. Wait, I'm worth it? My life's a mess. I've made terrible decisions. This whole temple thing, the things I put in my temple, I mean, I should have never put in my temple. My thoughts that go through my head, the way I treat people. And you're saying that through all that I'm still worth being loved? And God says, yeah. But God, I got to figure all these things out. God says, no, no, no. You are such a valuable treasure to me. I don't want to hide you anymore. You come to me, and let's release that treasure together to everyone. What Jesus is saying is this kingdom of heaven matters so much, and it means so much, that it's more valuable than anything that you will ever find in your entire life. And when you take that step of believing, you're going to know it. You're going to know that the treasure matters. You're going to be able to see the difference between the treasure and the fake. And it's going to become a part of you so much, you are not going to be able to help yourself but to go and take everything you have and give it away for eternity. Now some of us struggle there. It's like, man, I got a lot of good stuff. We're not saying that. We're not saying go out and sell everything that you have. That's not Jesus' message here. Jesus' message is this. It's going to be so valuable to you that you're not going to be able to help but want to share it with others, and you will know its value. But don't keep it to yourself. Jesus continues in the next verse, and he says this. Once again, this is the third time now. Once again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was let down in the lake and caught all kinds of fish. When it was full, the fishermen pulled it up on the shore. Then they sat down and collected the good fish in baskets, but threw the bad away. And so the fish that they have at this time, some of these fish are edible. And as a fisherman, you want to sell the edible fish. If you sell a poisonous fish and people get sick from that fish, even though you sold more fish, someone gets sick from them, they're not going to buy the fish from you anymore. So the fisherman has to know the good fish from the bad fish. That one's got too many bones. That one someone can get sick on. That one's doesn't even weigh enough to where it's good. Don't just throw it on the shore. Don't put it back in the water because we might catch it later. Put the good fish over here to sell, let the bad ones just sit there and rot forever. They're going to stink after a while. Nobody cares. No other fisherman wants to catch that in their net. Yet Jesus is sharing this with us. Listen to me. The kingdom of heaven is like this. At the end, that fisherman is going to pull that net up. And at the end, there's going to be both good fish and bad fish in that net. And in the end, God is going to know the difference. And so he didn't want anybody to miss his message within this. He has talked about the kingdom of heaven and its importance throughout these parables. It's about the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of heaven. And yeah, we talked about a mustard seed. We talked about yeast, and we talked about the little things that we put in our lives and how it can mess us up. We talked about our soil and our foundation and how it can go deeper or how it can die and how the birds can eat it and take it away. We talked about all those things, and all of those matter because they matter to Jesus. But the thing that mattered the most that ran through every single one of these parables was the kingdom of heaven. And in the end, God's going to know the difference. So whether you're a good fish or a bad fish, whether you're on good soil or bad soil, the choices we make, our everyday walk, God is going to know the difference. And there's a consequence that comes from it. It says, when it was full, the fishermen pulled it up on the shore. Then they sat down and collected the good fish and baskets, but they threw the bad fish away. This is how it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come and separate the wicked from the righteous and throw them into the fiery furnace, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. That's an eternal judgment. It's an eternal choice that we make every day. It's an eternal choice that people choose to walk away from. But once again, you're either searching for God or you're serving yourself. And so when people hear this, they struggle because they don't want to know that there's a God that has a judgment. Deanna and I watched this movie last night called Wonder, and there was this kid that sat before the principal. And the principal had to judge because of what he had done. And so in the end, he made the decision that you're going to be suspended 2 days for the things that you've done. And the parents were like, well, it's not his fault. Part of it's our fault. This is what we chose to do. And he was just like, well, that's what's going to happen. Is it's going to be a 2-day suspension because of it. And then they turned it and said, wait, we give all this money to the school. This is what we do. And by the way, we have friends in really high places. And I think those friends in high places, they might change your mind a little bit. To which the principal said, I have more friends than you do. And that other step, at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter. If your plan for eternity and your hope for eternity is, God, you got to let me into heaven because my wife is so faithful. God, I got to go in there because I've got friends that are in the back and they're waiting for me and they're waving right now. God, I've been really, really good and I've seen all this kind of bad. If that's your hope to getting in, that's a country song. That's not a Christian faith. The kingdom of heaven mattered to Jesus, and he shared this with them. And the reason it mattered is because he presents it to us now, but it's with eternity in mind. And you matter to him now because you matter to him for eternity. And he loves you now because he wants to love you for eternity. You may not be the best mom in the world. Your kid probably thinks you are. You may not be the best dad in the world because I'm here. Just kidding. So you're okay. You may not be the best husband right now. You may not be the best wife. You may not be the best whatever it might be. But when the kingdom of heaven matters, and you start to see God for who God is, you start to see as God sees, and you start searching because he gave you the greatest treasure known to man, it's going to change you from the inside out. But it does come with a warning. And even though you wouldn't do what God does, and even though you wouldn't treat it how God treats it, you know what else you wouldn't do? You would have never sent your one and only son for people like you and me. See, we don't give God that credit, do we? It sure is easy to cast the blame. Jesus finishes with these words. It's called the house summary. He says, have you understood all these things? Have you understood it? Have you understood that the kingdom of heaven matters? Have you understood that the kingdom of heaven is the greatest gift for every single one of us? Have you understood that in your life it's easy to allow these small things of evil, and it's easy to do what everyone else is doing? We get it. But there's also a treasure that's out there that matters so much, and you and I are that treasure. That when we find out about it, we can't store it and we can't bury it in a field. Why? Because the kingdom of heaven is what's at stake. And yeah, we got you. He said to them, therefore, whenever we see that, we stop and say, what in the world is that for? Therefore, every teacher of the law who has been instructed about the kingdom of heaven is like the owner of of a house who brings out of his storeroom new treasures as well as old. When you are a believer, a lot of times we don't want to talk about our past, do we? We don't want to have people, oh my goodness, look at our past. We don't want to come across someone that, oh my goodness, they know about my past. Because that's how they knew us. And yet many times when we come across those people, they're like, man, you were so different. What happened to you? You used to be so angry all the time. You're so calm now. You used to freak out about everything. You used to dress funny and act funny and say stupid things, and you were loud and you were abusive and you were whatever it might be. Something has changed. What's different? And Jesus, in his words, he says to us literally, the kingdom of heaven is like the owner of a house who brings out of his storeroom new treasures as well as old. Will you share that new treasure? Does that new treasure matter to you? And at the same time, can you be at peace and live with that old treasure? All the people from the Old Testament, they didn't talk about the kingdom of heaven. They looked for a Messiah. And finally, this Messiah was right before them. And this was the one that was going to change everything. And he did. He was going to do something that was never done before. And he did. And he was going to bring them the promise of eternal life. And he did. And he talked about it. And he shared it. And he let people know just how much they were loved. And just how much they truly mattered. But he didn't discount the Old Testament. And he didn't discount the prophets. And he didn't push all those things away. And he didn't say my way or the highway. And he didn't say, hey, listen, these are my commands now. Get rid of all those other commands. Because he understood the importance of the old, just as he understood the importance of the new. And as a believer, your life in the old is going to help you in your life in the new. Because all those that don't believe only have the life of the old. And they can't see a difference. But until we live every day with the kingdom of heaven being at stake, we're going to continue to have the things that take place in these schools. We're going to continue to have teenagers post on social media about shooting administrators or shooting up schools. We're going to have people going in and shooting up places they used to work or they did work. We're going to have people that are going to go off kilter. We're going to have all those things. Why? Because the kingdom of heaven doesn't matter to them. Because the kingdom of heaven has never been presented to them. Because the kingdom of heaven has never been part of their everyday life. And that's how we have to treat it that it matters. Because we're treating the words of Jesus as they matter. Amos said it like this in Amos chapter 5, verse 4. This is the Old Testament. He said this, seek me and live. Hundreds and thousands of years before Jesus ever came. Seek me and live. That's what the Lord said to the people. Seek me and live. Jeremiah said it this way. When you seek me wholeheartedly, which means with your entire heart, when you seek me, you will find me. Not an option. Not a, hey, you're not going to be able to tell for sure one way or another. You will find me. And the change will come from the inside out. See, when I look out here, and even sometimes when I even look in the mirror, I have to tell myself, God, is this a hidden treasure I see? You ever done that? Too many times you look in the mirror and go, oh, I don't remember that wrinkle being there. We look in the mirror and go, oh, I got to color my hair. We look in the mirror and go, where did my hair go again? We don't look at ourselves as one of God's hidden treasures. And when God looks at you, that's what he sees. Because he knows that in you and through you, that as you head out into this mission field, into your mission field, and as you hear these parables and these stories that Jesus shared, you'll have this opportunity to share that hidden treasure with them. That hidden treasure that is buried deep within you. You matter, and I matter. You're loved, and I'm loved. You're a treasure, and I'm a treasure. And the kingdom of heaven is at the beginning, and the kingdom of heaven is at the end. Y'all bow your heads as we just kind of internalize what we talked about over the last 4 weeks.